Hello and welcome everyone. Today we'll be discussing about calcium. Let's start with a case first. So the first case, it is a 52-year-old woman who had renal failure due to autosomally dominant polycystic kidney disease. She received a living donor kidney transplant after having been maintained on dialysis for nearly 3 years. Her pre-transplant medications included aspirin, carvedilol, sevelamer, sinacalcet at 60 milligrams daily. Transplantation was uncomplicated and the sinacalcet and sevelamer were stopped. She commenced standard triple immune suppression, and at 1 month after transplant, her lab values show creatinine of 1 of 45, uh, calcium of 11.2 and phosphate of 2.2. Now these are the options that you have. Which of this you think is the most likely cause of her hypercalcemia? You can comment below. What do you think is the most likely cause of hypercalcemia in this patient? Okay, so let's discuss about calcium. Why is calcium so important? Calcium is essential because it is important for our bones, heart, nerve and the muscle. Most of the calcium is stored in the bones. Only 1% is in the blood. Half of this which is present in the blood is ionized. That means it is free and active. So the calcium in blood is 50% is active, 40% is protein bound, 10% is complexed with other substances. So how do we get our calcium? We get it from our dietary sources, which is mainly absorbed in the upper small intestine with the help of vitamin D. Absorption is inefficient unless active vitamin D is present. So the role of vitamin D is very important. So just briefly on how the kidney handles calcium, only free or anion bound calcium is filtered. So calcium which is reabsorbed in the tubules, 60% is done in the proximal convoluted tubule, which is passive and hormone independent. 25% in the thick ascending limb, which is passive and relies on channels and voltage gradient. 15% is distal convoluted tubule, which is hormone sensitive and fine tuned by parathyroid hormone and vitamin D. The main hormones which regulate calcium and phosphate balance in the body are parathyroid hormone, fibroblast growth factor 23, active vitamin D. Now, where do these hormones act? They act where we have already discussed, that is the kidney, the bones and the intestine. So they interact in a negative feedback loop. If one changes, it triggers a change in another. So in this schematic diagram, you can see we have parathyroid hormones whose actions are to, once it is released from the parathyroid gland, when the calcium is low, it increases bone resorption, that is breakdown of the bones, releasing calcium and phosphate into the blood. It acts on the kidney to reduce the calcium loss in the urine, promote phosphate loss in the urine, upregulates the production of active vitamin D. Now why it promotes phosphate loss is because from the bone breakdown, we will get both calcium and phosphate. We want calcium. That is why the calcium will be retained and the phosphate will be excreted. So that is what parathyroid is trying to do. Next, we have the active vitamin D, which is produced mainly in the kidney. Its production is stimulated by the parathyroid, increases the absorption of calcium and phosphate from the intestine, increases the blood calcium level, but then feed back to decrease the parathyroid release, accelerates its own destruction. So it is self-regulating. Next is our FGF23, that is fibroblast growth factor 23. It is released from the bones, especially with increased phosphate levels. Stimulates the kidney to excrete more phosphate, downregulates the production of 125 vitamin D, directly suppresses the parathyroid production. So the feedback loop, that is, all the three hormones regulate each other to maintain a calcium and phosphate balance. For example, if the phosphate goes up, the FGF23 goes up to bring phosphate down, also reduces vitamin D, which decreases further reabsorption of the phosphate from the gut, like that. So this table basically summarizes the action of the three essential hormones that we have. Parathyroid, the main stimulus is from the low calcium levels. The main inhibitor is the high calcium level. It primarily regulates the blood calcium, that is the ionized calcium levels. The effects we have already discussed. FGF, it is main stimulus is high dietary phosphate and high 125 vitamin D. The main inhibitors are not known. Primarily, its regulation is not clearly defined. Its main effect is to stimulate phosphaturia. Next, the active vitamin D. The main stimulus is parathyroid. The main inhibitor is FGF23. It primarily regulates the absorption of the minerals from the intestine. So coming back to our case, how do we approach a patient of hypercalcemia? First, confirm that there is true hypercalcemia. Check the ionized calcium, not just the total calcium. Once you have that there is actual hypercalcemia, measure the parathyroid hormone. If the parathyroid hormone is high, that is not suppressed, it's parathyroid driven. If the parathyroid hormone is suppressed, then think non-parathyroid causes like malignancy, vitamin D excess, granulomatous diseases, and drugs. So hyperparathyroidism are of three types. The primary, that is you have an adenoma in the parathyroid. Secondary, that is you have a chronic kidney disease or vitamin D deficiency causing chronic hypocalcemia, which is stimulating and keeping the parathyroid levels high. Tertiary is after long-standing secondary hyperparathyroidism. The parathyroid glands become autonomous and continue secreting too much of parathyroid even after the original cause is fixed, such as in kidney transplant. So, if we go back to our case, patient had long-standing CKD and secondary hyperparathyroidism. After a transplant, the FGF23 drops, the kidney function improves, but the parathyroid gland remains hyperactive. Result, tertiary hyperparathyroidism, persistent parathyroid excess leading to hypercalcemia. So your answer, parathyroid excess. So the next case, a 24-year-old man who presents with malaise, nausea, weakness and confusion. He has no past medical history but was told that his blood pressure was high when he was 18 years old. Both his parents are hypertensive and his grandmother has renal failure. His lab results show sodium 142, potassium 6.4, creatinine 14.4, serum urea nitrogen 182, phosphate 10.2, calcium 6.5, albumin 3.9, bicarb 9. A Kilry ultrasound shows small scarred kidneys. Dialysis is initiated for his uremic syndromes. But 3 hours into the dialysis, the patient has developed seizure. Now, what is the most likely cause of seizure here? Okay, so let's see one by one what has happened. Let's see what is there before dialysis. Before dialysis, the patient is having severe metabolic acidosis. That means the blood pH is low. What acidosis does is it reduces the binding of the calcium to albumin. So ionized calcium is relatively preserved despite low total calcium. So the body is used to this particular balance. During dialysis, however, the dialysis corrects the acidosis quickly, increasing the pH. As the pH is rising, more calcium binds to the albumin. So the ionized calcium suddenly takes a fall. This rapid drop in the calcium triggers neurological symptoms like seizures, tetany, arrhythmia. This is a very classical clinical scenario. A uremic patient with severe acidosis, low calcium, sudden correction unmasks a profound hypocalcemia. How we can prevent this? Go slow, use high calcium dialysate for the first few runs, monitor for symptoms and check ionized calcium during and after dialysis. So here the answer is correction of metabolic acidosis. The next case, the next case is motor vehicle accident of a 44-year-old man with history of alcohol-induced liver disease and was admitted with shock, hemoperitoneum, liver laceration, anuric acute kidney injury, hyperkalemia, severe anangap metabolic acidosis, and he was commenced on CRRT, and given the bleeding and regional anticoagulation was used with citrate. On day 3 of CRRT, after normalization of the hyperkalemia and closing of the anangap, the patient deteriorates hemodynamically and anangap acidosis recurs despite normal serum potassium levels. Which of the following pattern best reflects this patient's current clinical status? So what is exactly happening here? What is the role of citrate in CRRT? Citrate is used to prevent clotting of the circuit by binding to the calcium. This lowers the ionized calcium in the body. Now, usually the liver metabolizes the citrate and the calcium is given back after filtration, which is normal after all CRRTs. So, this prevents any hypocalcemia from occurring. However, if the patient has a liver disease, then the citrate metabolism is impaired, which can result in citrate accumulation. Now, this excess citrate will cause hypocalcemia, which can result in hypotension, arrhythmia, tetany, and acidosis. So, the total calcium appears normal or increased because the lab test shows measures both the free as well as the citrate bound calcium. So what you get over here usually is a total calcium that is increasing and ionized calcium that is decreasing, which is option A. In this, you can do a ratio of the total calcium by the ionized calcium. If it is more than 2.5, if both units are measured in millimoles, then it means that there is citrate toxicity. So coming to our next case, it is a 47-year-old man who presents with fever, weight loss, night sweats. He has a history of HIV, but he was lost to follow-up 18 months back and not taking his medications. On examination, he has diffuse lymphadenopathy, hepatosplenomegaly. His lab results show a hemoglobin which is normal, leukocyte 13, CD4 count 200, creatinine 1.4, calcium 11.3, albumin 2.5, ionized calcium 1.5, parathyroid less than 10. So basically, there is hypercalcemia with low parathyroid. What could be the possible causes? So before we go into this particular case, let's see how do we approach hypercalcemia as such. So first you check for the elevated calcium levels, which is actually elevated or there is pseudo hypercalcemia. So if it is true, then next check the parathyroid levels. If the parathyroid hormones are high, that means it is parathyroid mediated. It can be primary hyperthyroidism, tertiary hyperparathyroidism, or if the parathyroid level is low, then we will look for non-parathyroid causes, which can be because of parathyroid related peptides which come from malignancy like lung, breast, head, neck cancers, high vitamin D levels which can come from granulomatous disease like sarcoidosis, tuberculosis, other infections and malignancies, high 25D, this is vitamin D intoxication, and you have other causes like multiple myeloma, adrenal insufficiency, vitamin A intoxication, immobilization, Williams syndrome, pheochromocytoma, milk alkali syndrome. So if we go back to our case now, so this patient had HIV and he was not taking medications, and now we have high calcium with low parathyroid. What could be happening? In all the causes we found, there is something we have seen, that is granulomatous disease, which can be because of tuberculosis, sarcoidosis, fungal infections or lymphoma. These granulomatous, they produce active vitamin D outside of the kidney from the activated macrophages. This increases the absorption of calcium from the gut. Since it is not driven by the parathyroid, the rising calcium level will suppress the parathyroid. Now, why do we suspect that there is a fungal infection? We do because the patient is HIV. He has a disseminated fungal infection because there are symptoms. There is weight loss, fever, lymphadenopathy, hepatosplenomegaly, and it is also confirmed with high active vitamin D levels in the blood. So, in this particular case, the answer is fungal infection. So, coming to a final case, this is a case of 24-year-old nulliparous woman who is at 28 weeks of her gestation. She is having a asymptomatic hypercalcemia in her prenatal visit. In her past medical history, there are 2 episodes of nephrolithiasis, but she actually doesn't have any as such history of hypercalcemia. She only takes prenatal visit vitamins, and her family history does have nephrolithiasis for father as well as for brother. The physical examination is essentially unremarkable. You do find the calcium level is high, the phosphate is 3.2, parathyroid is low, and your 125, that is active vitamin D, is 236, which is high. So, what could be possibly happening? Which of the following gene mutation could be responsible for this particular condition? Before we actually go into this particular case, let's see the metabolism. This schematic diagram is showing the vitamin D synthesis and its degradation. The source of vitamin D is skin and diet. It has 2 activation steps. Step 1, liver, where you get the 25 hydroxy. It is essentially a storage form. The second form, kidney, where you have the 1 alpha hydroxylase. So, now you have hydroxylation at 1 position also. So, it is 125 dihydroxy vitamin D, which is the active form. Its action, as we have already dealt with it, mineral absorption in the gut. How it is degraded? It is degraded by 24 hydroxylase. It acts both on 125 as well as 25, producing inactive forms. So, it is hydroxylation of the 24th place. It is stimulated by FGF23 as well as the active form of the vitamin D. It is inhibited by parathyroid. So, what happens in this particular case? In this case, you have high vitamin D, you have high calcium. So, it could possibly because of the high active form present. So, the answer here is the metabolism is affected. So, it is 24A1, which is the answer. So, the 24A1, as you have seen, is a main form of degradation, and if the hormone is defective, it will result, if the enzyme is defective, it will result in high levels of activated vitamin D, leading to increased absorption of the calcium from the gut, decreased parathyroid, and nephrolithiasis. Now, what happens in pregnancy that it gets unmasked because there is fetal growth, there is high demand for vitamin D, so its production increases, but because there is no degradation available, its levels becomes too high, resulting in increased absorption from the gut and hypercalcemia. Why the other option cannot be done is because obviously if there is 1 hydroxylase which is deficient, then it will result in hypocalcemia and rickets because it's the active form which is getting blocked. Next is NCC, it is a sodium chloride transporter. It will result in Gentleman syndrome. It will have hypokalemia, hypomagnesemia, and hypocalciuria, not hypercalcemia. Next is SLC34A3. This is the renal phosphate transporter. The mutation of this will result in hypophosphatemic rickets with hypercalciuria again. Sometimes it can present with hypercalcemia, but the main feature is low phosphate, which is normal over here. So, it cannot be one of the causes. Thank you for your patience. I hope going through all these cases, your idea of calcium and its metabolism in the body is more clear. How kidney handles it is more clear. Thank you for your patience.